Hello, everyone, and welcome to our financial aid application webinar. My name is Domenica Mahalka, and I'm the Associate Director for the Financial Aid Department here at CSUN. Today, we have our amazing counselors from the Financial Aid Department here to help you navigate through the financial aid application. And we're going to hopefully provide you some guidance as to, what steps to take. If you're stuck in a question, hopefully if you've already started your application, they're going to be able to help you. But we're going to go through the application process, and I'll go ahead and let each counselor introduce themselves as they go through their sections. And we're going to go ahead and start. I'll start off with Sonia. Sonia?
Hi, everyone. I'm Sonia Adlersberg, and I'm going to take a moment to explain the format of today's session. We have several panelists that will be presenting information on how to complete your FAFSA or CADAA application. The presentation slides will show you how questions are presented on the applications. However, the questions may be presented in a different order depending on which application you're using. The panelists will also be working behind the scenes to take your questions during the presentation. The chat feature is disabled, but we will be taking questions through the Q&A feature that is located at the bottom of your screen. If you hover your mouse near the bottom of your screen, you will see a feature called Q&A. Simply click on the Q&A icon and type your question. All questions are public, so please do not enter any personal information into the Q&A. To protect privacy, questions submitted with personal information will not be answered during the webinar. The webinar is also being recorded for future use. Look at the Financial Aid Department website in the near future to find the link. So with that, let's get started. To begin with, the first thing we want to do is make sure that we are filling out the correct application. In California, we have 2 applications, but you should only use one, not both. The FAFSA is for U.S. citizens and eligible non-citizens. The CADAA is for undocumented or DREAM students with AB 540 status at CSUN. Please do not fill out the CADAA if you are currently a U.S. citizen or eligible non-citizen. For the 2021-22 academic year, you will report your 2019 tax and income information. If you are dependent, both the student and parent will need to sign the application. Make sure to reapply every year starting on October 1st, and be sure to submit it before the March 2nd California priority deadline. And with that, I will hand it off to our next presenter.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Elizabeth Arias, and I will be covering how to log in to your FAFSA or CADAA application, the importance of using the correct name on the applications, and contact information. Next slide. On both the FAFSA and the CADAA applications, you will have the new user or returning user options. You select the one that is correct for you. It is important to select the correct academic year. Remember that you must select the 2021-2022 academic year application for the fall 2021 and spring 2022. The current 2021 year application is still active, and it will not close until July 2021. So remember, if you want financial aid for next fall 2021 and spring 2022, the application you're applying for today or during this time is the 21-22 application. On the FAFSA, you log in with your FSA ID and password. If you can't remember your FSA ID username, you can use your email or mobile to also log in. If that doesn't work, you can select to retrieve your username. They will give you the option to select text or email. But obviously, if you couldn't use your text or email in the beginning, just answer your challenging questions. If all of that fails because you can't remember the phone you used or your email, you will have to call the U.S. Department of Education for help. The universities you apply to will not be able to help you correct your user ID or password. You will call the U.S. Department of Education at 1-800-433-3243 for help. Only they will be able to assist you to reset your password, your username. If you forget your password, you will be prompted to enter FSA ID, username, and date of birth. They're going to see what is on file, and you'll be sent a text or email, or you'll be answering your challenging questions to reset your password. If that doesn't work, again, you have the auth. The only people that can help you reset your password will be the U.S. Department of Education for help. Same number, 1-800-433-3243. I know how difficult and how hard it is to sometimes find these numbers on the application, so I am providing this information, and I'll put it in the chat or in the questions and answers as well. For your CADAA application, you will log in using your user ID and password. If you can't remember your user ID or password, you select Forget User ID or Reset Password. You will be required to enter first name, last name, date of birth, zip code, and email address. All this information has to match the data that is on the CADAA application. If your application is found, you will be prompted to answer the security questions to reset the ID or password. If you can't remember this information or it's not pulling up, if that does not work, you can call the California Student Aid Commission to help. The California Student Aid Commission's number, or CSAC, is 1-888-894-0143. Anytime you reset a password, allow 30 minutes to activate. It's going to take some time for it to register. Allow 30 minutes, but then you should be able to log in. So the next section, next slide, is your legal name. If you are submitting a FAFSA, make sure that you are entering the exact name on your Social Security card and make sure that it matches the birthday on file. This information is important because it's going to be sent to the Social Security Administration for verification. It also has to match the information that you have with each university that you are applying to. The schools will not receive your application if they can find you as a student. Name, date of birth, Social Security, all have to match in order for the schools to receive your application. You won't know that they never received it because, we're not going to find you as a student. So make sure that the Admissions and Records Office at the institutions you apply to or at CSUN Admissions and Records, contact them and verify it's the same name and information. If you are submitting a CADAA application, make sure it matches the information you have registered with also the universities. The applications will not be received if your name, date of birth does not match their file. Okay, you'll only need to enter on your CADAA, you'll only need to enter a Social Security number or IT number if you have one, but it's not required. Next slide. So contact information. You want to make sure you're updating this information. Once you complete your FAFSA and your CADAA application, the U.S. Department of Education or the California Student Aid Commission will be contacting you through this format. They will let you know, hey, your application has been received and completed successfully. If you do not receive an email from the U.S. Department of Education for your FAFSA or from the California Student Aid Commission for the CADAA, that means something went wrong. They will also send you an email if something didn't match or it was rejected. You want to make sure to be on top of this. So make sure you have the correct email, and your correct phone number in case they need to call you back. But remember, this information is important and to update. Thank you. That concludes my section. You all have a good one.
Hi, everyone. My name is Diana, and I'm a financial aid counselor, and I will be presenting in the next section. Next slide, please. So I will be discussing the citizenship question on your FAFSA or your CADAA. This particular question, you may want to rush through it and answer it, but I want to make sure to emphasize the importance of every single question on this FAFSA as we're covering it here today. One slight typo can cause you delays in being awarded financial aid. So we want to make sure that we cover each section and as to the importance of its accuracy. So this is one of those sections, is your citizenship status. You want to make sure that you're answering, yes, you're a US citizen, or you're a permanent resident, such as a non-eligible citizen for FAFSA purposes. Now, if you are not a US citizen or a non-eligible citizen, you want to make sure that you're submitting a CADAA application. What happens if at this moment, today in November, you are a non-eligible citizen, but perhaps have an interview coming up in December or January for your permanent residency card, and you've already submitted your CADAA as a non-eligible citizen. The moment that you become an eligible non-citizen, you want to submit a FAFSA, but you also need to self-identify yourself to our office and let us know that you submitted a CADAA, but later your citizenship status changed, and now you've submitted a FAFSA and would like to be awarded utilizing the FAFSA because your status changed. That is possible. So you can do that. Also, for US citizens, this is important. If you are a naturalized US citizen who recently became a naturalized citizen, if you did not update your Social Security number identification with the Social Security Administration to indicate that you are not a permanent resident, but instead have been naturalized and have become a US citizen, when you submit your FAFSA, as it was covered in the previous slide, you're going to enter a Social Security number that when it was originally issued, it was issued to a permanent resident. So that can cause your FAFSA to then trigger an additional verification of your citizenship status. So the school, CSUN, what we'll do is then we'll request to see proof of your citizenship. But this is typically triggered, again, for someone who is a permanent resident who later becomes a US citizen. So that is this section in terms of citizenship, and why you want to make sure that it's important. You also want to make sure that if you are an eligible non-citizen, that your alien or your permanent residency card is correctly identified on the FAFSA. This will also go through a verification process. So if you enter a number incorrectly, the application will then trigger an additional verification item. So again, these two sections are highly important because they are going to be verified with the Department of Homeland, DHS, to verify your citizenship status. Next slide, please. Now we're going to move on to the parents' education here. Now, the reason that I want to discuss this particular slide is that your FAFSA and your CADAA is going to ask you questions about yourself, and then is going to repeat those questions about your parents. So when you're when you're filling out your application, you want to make sure who is being asked the question of. So in this one, you're being asked, what is your parent's highest level of education? So depending on who you identified as parent 1, you'll answer that question. And based on who you identified as parent 2, you'll answer that question. There is going to be a question coming up that is going to ask about the student's high school completion. So just make sure that you are paying attention as to, is this question being asked about the parent or is it being asked about the student? Next slide, please. So here we are at the student question that is asking, what was the high school that you attended? So the FAFSA and the CADAA both have a list of California high schools and other high schools depending on the state that you are selecting. And most of your schools will actually be populated on this slide. In case you're not, you would just type in your high school name and check off the box that says school not on this list. Next slide, please. And here is a question about now the student. So the previous question was asking about the high school completion. Now you're being asked when you come into the college for this year. So this would be for fall 2021. What will be your grade level? Are you going to be a first-time freshman, second-year freshman, a sophomore, a junior? What if you graduated and now are going into a credential program or perhaps a master's program? You want to make sure that you are answering these questions accurately as to what your status will be for that incoming semester. Your financial aid eligibility is based on your grade level. So you want to make sure that you're answering this correctly. A very common error that occurs is especially with credential students. So although you've received a bachelor's, a credential program is not considered a master's program. It is still considered a 5th year undergraduate program. It's a certificated program. So when answering your FAFSA, you will not answer, yes, this is a graduate program, if you were only admitted into a credential program. Now, if you were admitted into a credential master's program, then you would go ahead and answer being a master's. So you just want to be very careful in answering this question, specifically for the teaching credentials. Again, this is one of those pitfalls that students will then later have to go and make these corrections. And that typically puts a delay on your awarding. So this is my time. And now I'm gonna present, I'm not gonna present, but I'm gonna turn it over to the next presenter.
Hi, Matadors. My name is Sarah Perez, and I'm one of your financial aid counselors here at CSUN. And I will be going over the student financials section. So under student financials, in your FAFSA, you will need to provide income information. And it does request prior tax year information. So for the 2020-2021 FAFSA, you will be using your tax information from the year 2019. The great thing about FAFSA recipients, unfortunately, just for FAFSA recipients, there is a built-in tool called the IRS data retrieval tool that I wanted to talk to you about. So the great thing about this tool is that it's built into the FAFSA, and if you're able to use it successfully, you can bring in information directly from the IRS website. So your tax information for 2019, again, you can use your tax return, but there is this great built-in feature that you can use that will help to reduce errors when filling out your FAFSA application. So you'll see here on this page that the first question is asking for 2018, have you completed your IRS tax return income or another tax return? And so you'll put the different options are, I have already completed my return, I will file, or I'm not going to file. So of course, the IRS data retrieval tool is a tool for students who have already filed a 2019 tax return. So if you indicate that you've already filed a tax return, you'll see that different questions will populate until you'll see that blue square that says IRS data retrieval tool, and you'll click that link to IRS. So some of the questions that you'll be asked is for 2019, have you completed your income tax return? What income tax return did you or will you file? And what was or will be your tax filing status? And did you file a Schedule 1 with your 2019 tax return? So at this point, you'll want to, if you have your tax return on hand, you can go through your tax return and filling out the section that's appropriate to the question, or you can click that link to IRS button, and that will help reduce the amount of errors that you have when filling out your FAFSA application. So again, this is just for FAFSA recipients. There is that built-in feature that will bring in information directly from the IRS website. Next slide. So go forward, yes. Thank you. So when you are able to successfully link to the IRS data retrieval tool, you will be able to put in it'll request your student FSA ID and password. That is the same username and password that you used when you logged into your FAFSA application. So it's not a different password, it's the same username and password. Once you put in your FSA ID and your password, you'll click that next button, and let's go to next slide. And once you hit next, it'll pop up this error message that says this is a US government system. And so you'll want to go ahead and review that message and okay to move forward to be taken to a third-party website. So you're going to be transferred to the IRS government website, so that way you can retrieve your tax return information. So you'll read that message, you'll need to hit okay to approve to move forward, to move on to that third-party site. And you'll have to click that okay to indicate that you're aware that you're leaving the FAFSA page to continue, or you can cancel to stay onto the FAFSA page. Again, if you would like to use the data retrieval tool, we do encourage, because again, it brings in all that information directly from the IRS. You won't have to put in that information manually. So you have that option as a FAFSA recipient to click OK to leave the FAFSA website to proceed to the IRS site. Next slide. So once you're on the IRS website, it's very important that you enter your address exactly as it's shown on your 2019 tax return. It has to mirror it exactly. So you want to make sure that if you're having issues, you enter your address and you're not able to use that tool successfully, you want to review your address and make sure that it is the same as it's shown on your 2019 tax return. So if maybe recently you have moved, you no longer live in a residence that you were back in 2019, you want to use the address in 2019. The address must be exactly as when you filed that tax return. So just make sure that if you're attempting to use the IRS website and you start to get a little frustrated, you're like, it's not working, it's not going through, what's going on? You want to make sure that it's entered exactly as was on your tax return. So again, it can be a little fickle, but just know, okay, I need to make sure that the information is entered correctly. And this will, again, be a great tool to use to minimize the amount of errors when bringing in the federal income tax information for the student. Next slide. So once you are able to match your address correctly, and the system identifies your income tax return, you will see this page. This page will say 2019 federal income tax information. None of the identifiers will be present. You won't see the tax year, you won't see the dollar amount in income, but this page will show you that you've successfully been able to retrieve the information directly from the IRS. Now, you'll have two options. So you see at the bottom, it says transfer my tax information into the FAFSA form. And the second option is do not transfer my tax information and return to the FAFSA. So even though you successfully entered your address, your name, and it populated your tax information, you still have to accept to transfer that tax information onto the FAFSA form. So make sure that once you get to this page, that you click transfer, transfer my tax information onto the FAFSA, and then click transfer now to move forward and transfer that information automatically onto your FAFSA application. Next slide. This will be the notification that you receive that tells you that you've successfully transferred your 2019 IRS tax information. So you know that you've successfully used the data retrieval tool when you have seen this, this publication on your screen. So the IRS information this means that your IRS information has been successfully transferred into your FAFSA. And you'll see, if you look down below, it says, for example, the question, what is your adjusted gross income for 2019? The answer will say transferred from the IRS. So you won't see a dollar amount. So if you don't see a dollar amount, don't think you did it wrong. The answer will be transferred from the IRS. And that is the successful answer, meaning you've successfully used that tool, that built-in feature. So this is what you want to see after you've successfully used it. And again, we encourage students to use the data retrieval tool. The main reason is if you are selected for what's called a verification process, we won't need to collect any tax documents from you because we know that you've successfully transferred that tax information from the IRS website. So we encourage you to use this feature. And that's the end of the student financial section. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Pamela Arriaga, and I will be covering the student financial section, but how to manually enter your income financial information on the CADAA and FAFSA application. So if you're unable to use the data retrieval tool for FAFSA students, you will have to manually enter your financial information onto the application. For CADAA students, right, you don't have the option to use the data retrieval tool, so you will need to input the financial information manually. So before you get started on this section, right, if you know you will be entering the information manually, you need to make sure you have with you a copy or your documents, the 2019 1040 tax return forms, a copy of your 2019 W-2s, and any records that you may have of any untaxed income that you might have received in the year 2019. For example, for child support you received, interest income you might have earned in 2019, or maybe even veteran non-education benefits you might have received during the year. Now, one thing also to keep in mind, right, is that this is the student section, right? So when you start reading the questions, you're going to notice on there that they are going to ask for your information and your spouse's information. So the spouse information is only going to apply if you are married. So this is basically, how can I explain this? So this is something that a lot of students get confused about, right? So you might have gotten married, for example, in the year 2020, you were unmarried in 2019, and then when you're filling out this section, you may think that you don't have to include your spouse's information for 2019 because you were not married during that year. That is incorrect, right? So even though you might have not been married in 2019, But now, as you're filling the application, you are legally married, you will need to input your spouse's information as well. So just keep that in mind. If at the moment you're filling out the application, you are married, you will also need to gather your spouse's 2019 1040 tax return form, their W-2s for 2019, and any records they may have of any untaxed income they might have earned during that year. So when we look at the questions, right, of what was your adjusted gross income, it's going to let you know on there, right, that you have to reference your 1040 forms, right? So if you did file taxes, so you will have to go to line 8B and locate that information on there. If you are married, right, but were not married in 2019, you're still going to have to report your husband or spouse or your spouse, right, adjusted gross income. So you will have to combine it. So even though you might have filed separately in 2019, you're just going to add up the amounts, right? And this is going to be the same for every question that's asking on there for you and your spouse's income. And like I said, only if you're married. If you're not married, then you don't have to worry about adding anybody else's income. This is solely would be the student's information. So then it'll also ask, right, what was the income tax amount for 2019? So you'd have to reference the tax form 1040 and you'd go to line 14. It says minus line 2 of Schedule 2. Now, it is possible that you may not have a Schedule 2. So if you don't, then you're just inputting the amount that is on line 14. So kind of going back to the documents that you are going to need, right, to fill out this income section. So some of you may notice that along to the 1040 forms, you're also going to have schedules 1, 2, and 3. But it is also possible that you don't have any of the schedules, and that's okay. So if you come across a question that's going to reference the 1040 and also reference a specific schedule, whether it's 1, 2, or 3, if you find that you don't have the schedule, don't worry about it. Treat it as a 0, okay? So the next question is going to ask, how much did you earn from working, right? So there was a question earlier that asked, I didn't file taxes. Do I still have to report how much I worked? Yes. So this question is asking, how much did you earn from working? So you do have to report those wages, and this is where you'd be reporting that. So you could find it under your taxes, or you could also look at your W-2s. If you earn cash, then you just calculate how much you earned for the year 2019. Next slide, please. So this section, you're going to come across that asset section. So you may have to report your asset information for you and your spouse. So this will basically be determined by the application, depending on the questions that you've already answered and what you've input on there. It's going to let you know whether or not you have the option to skip this section. Now, if you don't have the option to skip this section and you're actually instructed to provide your asset information, these are the 3 questions you're going to be asked on there. So you're going to need information on the cash, checking, and savings balances you have as of the date you're filling out the application. So if you look at the question 41, right, and it's going to look similar on the FAFSA application as it will on the CADAA application. So it's going to ask you as of today, which is the date that you're filling out the application, what is you and your spouse, if applicable, right, the total current balance of your cash, savings, and checking accounts. So you'd take the amount you have combined in cash, right, savings, checking, and that's what you're reporting on the application. But it's solely on the day that you're filling out the application. Now, the next question asks you, what is the net worth of your investments, which can include a real estate? So this question is really important to pay attention. A lot of students make a mistake and report the net worth of the home they live in. You don't have to report that. The home you live in is not considered an investment because you live on there. So this would include any, for example, rental property, additional real estate you may have aside from the home you live in. So how do you calculate the net worth if you did have additional real estate properties that you needed to report? So in reporting the net worth, right, you would take the property value and you subtract from that the outstanding debt. And then that's going to give you the net worth. So for example, let's say the property value is 100,000, and of that 100,000, right, is the value. You're going to subtract what you owe from that property, 75,000. That's going to give us 25,000 net worth. So 25,000 is what you'd be reporting on the application as the net worth of your investment. The next question is going to ask you about the net worth of your current business or investment farm. So it's really important to pay attention when you're answering this question, right? So another question that a lot of students get confused about. So sometimes you may have your own business, but just because you have a business doesn't necessarily mean that you have to report the net worth of that business. So what they want to know is if you have a business or an investment farm in which you employ more than 100 employees, then at that point, yes, you have to report the net worth. Now, if you have a business or you have a farm and you have less than 100 employees, you do not have to report the net worth of that property or business. Okay, next slide, please. On this next section, right, we want to reference back to the 1040 forms. So it's going to ask about education credits that you might have received in 2019. So you'd have to look, go to the 1040 tax return forms, and you're going to check and see if you have a Schedule 3. If you have a Schedule 3 form, then you're going to look at line 3. The amount on line 3 is what will be reported on this question. Now, if you're going through your tax forms and you see you don't have a Schedule 3, then it's okay. You just go ahead and type a 0 on there. That means you did not get any education credits. So if you're going through your taxes and you find that you don't have any schedules, it's okay. Just remember, put a 0 and then move on to the next question. The next question is going to ask about child support you paid because of a divorce or separation. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that this is referring to child support paid for any children who are not part of your household. So if that child is part of your household, then you will not be reporting the child support paid for that child. The next question is going to ask about taxable earnings from need-based employment programs. For example, federal work studies or any need-based employment in which you were part of a fellowship or an assistantship. So if you were part of a federal work study, for example, you'd be reporting basically your federal work study award that you received for spring 2019 and the fall 2019, because remember, the income information of the applications for both FAFSA and CADAA are looking at is 2019 only. Next slide, please. So under this section, it's going to ask you about taxable college grant and scholarships you may have received during the 2019 year and that were reported to the IRS in your adjusted gross income. So this is only asking about grants or scholarships that were reported as income on your tax returns. So this doesn't include your federal Pell Grant, your Cal Grant, or possibly State University grant. This is specifically referring to taxable grants and scholarships. So you'd be able to see on your taxes, or you'd know when you filed your taxes if you had specific grants or scholarships that needed to be reported to the IRS. And this is what this question is referring to. So if you didn't have any grants or scholarships that were reported on your tax return, right, because they were not taxable, then you'll just put 0 on that question. The next question is going to ask you about combat pay. So combat pay is referring to military service personnel that were designated in hazard zones. So if you were a military service personnel, you would get a special combat pay for being put in the hazardous area to work at. And that's basically what this is referring to. So if that does not apply to you, you're just putting 0 on there and you move on to the next question. So the following question is going to ask you about earnings from work under a cooperative education program that's offered through your college. So this is not referring to internships. So these are rare, but if you were part of a co-op program, the earnings from working through that program, you'd be reporting under this section. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So under this section, let's see, payments. So we're going to be looking at payments to tax-deferred pension and savings plans. So this may be withheld from earnings. So in this scenario, right, you want to look at your W-2s if you're unsure how much, if you made any payments to tax-deferred pension or savings plans. So if you look at your W-2 for 2019, you'd look at boxes 12A through 12D. So if you see any amounts on there, what you want to be cautious about is the codes next to the amounts, right? So if you see that any of the amounts that are reported on lines 12A through 12D have the codes D, E, F, G, H, or S, then those amounts are reported on this section. If you see any other codes on there, don't worry about it. That does not have to be reported under this question. It's only those letters that I mentioned and that are on the application. So the next question is going to ask you about IRA deduction and payments made. So that information can be found on your IRS 1040 form. So you're going to look for the Schedule 1. So if you locate a Schedule 1, you're going to go to the lines 15 and 19, and you're going to add those two up. And whatever the amount is, you're going to report that under this section. Now, if they're blank or 0, then you're reporting 0 on there. The next question is going to ask you about child support received for all children. So just make sure that you are reporting child support received for children and not any sort of foster care or adopted payments that you may receive, because they are different. So remember, you're not reporting foster care payments or adopted payments, only child support that you have received for your children. The next question is going to ask you about tax-exempt interest income that can be located on the IRS Form 1040, and you'd go straight to line 2A. So whatever amount is reported on there, you'd input that on this question. So one thing to remember when we're referencing back the tax return forms or the schedules 1, 2, or 3. So if you're seeing a negative number at any point during this looking at the forms, remember that that's treated as 0. Okay, so negative, you don't report a negative amount on the FAFSA or CADAA application, you just put 0. Next slide, please. Okay, so for this section, you're going to be reporting any untaxed portions of IRA distributions or pensions. So to locate this information, you're going to have to reference back your tax return forms for 2019, your 1040. You're going to look at lines 4A and 4C. So what I want you to keep in mind is when you're looking at the forms, I don't know if you have it with you, but you're going to see that form lines 4A and 4C are right on top of each other. So you're going to take the top and bottom 4A and 4C, you're going to add that up, put that amount to the side. And then we also have to calculate what's the total between lines 4B plus 4D, also top and bottom. So add those up. So then you're going to take the total between 4A and 4C, subtract the amount total for lines 4B and 4D. That amount is the one you will be reporting under this question asking about untaxed portions of IRA distributions and pensions. Now, one thing to keep in mind is while looking at your 1040 tax return forms, if you see on there that it says a rollover, then at that point, you don't even have to do the math calculation. Just go ahead and put 0 on the FAFSA or CADAA application because rollovers are not reported. So if we move on to the next question. It's going to ask about housing, food, and other living allowances paid to member of the military, clergy, and others. So what I want you to keep in mind in this one is it specifically refers to resident advisors, right? So aside from potentially being a member of the military or a clergy, if you were a resident advisor in the year 2019, please make sure that you're reporting what you earned during the 2019 year. Do not include any value of on-base military housing or the amount of the basic military allowance you receive for housing. So this is only going to include if you're a resident advisor or any living allowances as a member of the military or clergy. So the next question is referring to veterans non-educational benefits. So if you received any non-educational benefits for veterans, that must be reported on the FAFSA or CADAA, and it'll be under this section. Next slide, please. So here, it's going to ask you to report any other untaxed income that has not been reported yet in the other questions that have already been asked from you. So you will have to report, for example, workers' compensation, disability benefits, any untaxed foreign income that you may have. Just make sure that you're not including financial aid, for example, welfare payments, foster care payments, supplemental security income, or untaxed Social Security benefits. So both applications do a very good job at outlining what should be excluded and what can be included. So make sure you read it carefully when seeing what should be reported under other untaxed income. And then the next section, right, is going to ask you about money received or paid on your behalf. So this can be money that you receive from a parent or other person that helped you pay for any type of financial expenses that you must have had or may have had in 2019. And this is what's being reported here. So it's anything, remember, that has not already been reported in the previous questions. Next slide, please. And this final section of student financials, you are going to be asked, remember, this question is going to apply to you, your spouse, or anyone in your household. So basically what this question is asking is if you, your spouse, or anybody in your household has received benefits from any of the government programs listed below. So if any or all or multiple apply, you go ahead and check those questions. And just remember, right, it doesn't only apply to you, but it's for you, your spouse, or anyone else in your household. And then the final question it's going to ask, as of today, are you or your spouse a dislocated worker? So you'd answer yes or no on that section. So just remember that if you are going to have to input the financial information manually onto the FAFSA or CADAA information, what's going to make this section much easier for you is having all the proper documents with you when answering each question. So just remember, right, have your 2019 1040 forms, have all the appropriate schedules that you may have that can be schedule 1, 2, or 3. Have your 2019 W-2s and have any other documents that record any untaxed 2019 income you might have received. Thank you, and that concludes this section. And I'll go ahead and pass it over to the next presenter. Good morning. I'm sorry, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carla, and I will be going over selected colleges, housing plans, and dependency status. Okay, so once you've covered all of the information, the beginning information of your FAFSA, you're going to get to the portion about colleges and housing plans. Now, this is just like the application, it's a crucial part of your application. as all this information is needed to determine your financial aid. This portion is fairly simple, and I think you're probably all familiar with it. This is where you're going to be looking for the college of your choice or colleges in the case that you're including other schools other than CSUN. You can start by searching your school by state, city, or simply the school name. You can also, again, include other schools, up to 10 schools. All of the information that you include on your FAFSA will be sent to all the schools. So even if it's not just CSUN, they will essentially receive the same information, with the exception of the schools that you've included. Next slide, please. Again, this is where you're going to look up your school. The easiest way to find your school is by using our school code. It's you can see it on there, 001153 or 00115300. Once the school has been selected, you will be prompted to select your housing plan or living arrangement. Some things to know about this section, which are important. You want to make sure you select the correct or most accurate housing. So your housing plan, what does that mean? Where are you going to be living for that academic year? Keep in mind, again, this is for the 21-22 academic year. You'll see your options will be on campus. So you'll be dorming with parents or relatives. You're living with mom and dad, or you're living with aunt, uncle, grandma, grandpa, or off campus. This means that you're renting an apartment on your own or you're living with roommates. The housing plan you select will give us a better idea what types of financial aid you're eligible for. This also helps us determine your cost of attendance or your COA. What is cost of attendance, you may ask, is pretty much a budget that every student is assigned. Regardless of what school you're attending, you're assigned a specific budget based on if you're a grad student, undergrad, doctoral student, so on and so forth. Some of the components that are included in the cost of attendance are tuition and fees, room and board. That's where your housing plan comes in, books and supplies, etc. This is also, like I said earlier, how we determine your financial need. It's determined by adding all of your college fees and living costs, and it does take into account your expected family contribution or your EFC. And you probably are also familiar with that. You're seeing it at the end of your FAFSA application. In simpler terms, you're adding your college fees and living costs minus your expected family contribution, and that's what's going to give you your financial need. As you can see, the cost of attendance varies by what housing plans you choose. Note that it does take into account, like I said earlier, if you're an undergrad student credential, because tuition fees differ per program. That's why it's really important that you're choosing the correct housing plan. It can also be changed, but once you are completing the application, you want to make sure that you're completing it with the most accurate information as possible. Next slide, please. Okay, now that we've covered a little bit of that, I'm going to go over dependency status. And this is going to answer a lot of the questions that were coming in our chat. You know, how am I considered an independent or a dependent student? I hope that I can answer some of those questions for you. This is another crucial part of the application. Your dependency status does determine, again, the type of aid that you're eligible for or not. As mentioned before, it is important that you answer these as accurately as possible. You may be familiar with the terms, I'm a dependent student or an independent student. These questions will help determine what type of student you will be considered for the academic year in question. On this page, you're going to be asked, one of the first questions is, when were you born? You will be asked, were you born before January 1st, 1998? And whatever applies to you, that's what you will answer, yes or no. You will also be asked about your marital status. What is the marital status as of the day that you're completing your application? If you're single, you want to choose that option. If you're married, you also choose the corresponding option. It's pretty clear of what you're going to be answering. Just keep in mind, that you're answering as the day of that you're completing the application. However, it can be that, what if you are married, but you're living separately? Well, what do I put? What do I answer? For FAFSA purposes, a married person is considered separated if they have chosen to live in separate households. So if that's the case, if you are married, but you're separated from your spouse, then you're going to, again, indicate that you are separated. Next slide, please. Okay, continuing on with dependency status. You will then be prompted to questions regarding children or dependents. This can sometimes be a little confusing, but I can assure you it's not. If you, I'm sorry, okay. You are going to select yes if you have any children and they're receiving more than half of the support from you, and if you're married, from your spouse. So if you're married, from you and your spouse, are they receiving half of the support, financial support from you? You're also answering yes if you're expecting a child who will be born before or during the award year, and if married, again, from your spouse. You will provide, and if you're providing half of the child's support. You're answering no if you do not have any children. You're also answering no if your children are receiving less than half of their support from you, and if married, from your spouse. You will then be prompted to answer additional questions. These questions will determine whether or not your parent information will be needed to complete the application. So again, it depends on what you're answering on those questions about having children or dependents. Additional questions. Again, we were seeing some of these on the chat. Are you currently serving on active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces for purposes other than training? Select the particular box if you're currently serving in the U.S. Armed Forces or are a National Guard or Reserve enlistee who is on active duty for reasons other than state or training purposes. So you're going to select that box if it applies to you. If you're a National Guard or Reserve enlistee who is on active duty for state or training purposes, or if you're not currently serving on active duty in the armed forces, do not select the box. So those are two different things. Are you a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces? This question cannot be left blank. You have to answer this question. Select the box if you're a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces. If you're a veteran, you're considered a veteran if you have engaged in active duty, including basic training in the U.S. Armed Forces, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine, or Coast Guard, or are a National Guard or Reserve enlistee who was called to active duty for other than state or training purposes, or were a cadet or midshipman at one of the service academies, and were released under a condition other than dishonorable. So that is, if you fall under those, then you will check off the veteran, you are a veteran box. Also, select the box if you're not a veteran now, but will be by June 30th, 2022. Do not select the box if you have never engaged in active duty, including basic training in the U.S. Armed Forces, are currently a reserved officer training corps student or cadet, are a National Guard or Reserve enlistee activated only for state or training purposes, were engaged in active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces, or are currently serving in the U.S. Armed Forces and will continue to serve through June 30th, 2022. Okay, next box would be, at any time since you turned 13, were both your parents deceased? Were you in foster care, or were you a dependent or ward of the court? Select the box if at any time since you turned 13, you had no living parent, biological or adoptive, even if you're now adopted. So whether, if it was only maybe for 1 year, so at any time since you turned 13, if any of these situations fall under that, then you would check off the box. Another one of the options would be if you were in foster care, even if you no longer are in foster care as of today, or were a dependent or ward of the court, even if you're no longer a dependent or ward of the court. For federal purposes, for financial aid, someone who's incarcerated is not considered a ward of the court. Okay, next box would be, as determined by a ward of the court in your state or legal residence, are you or were you an emancipated minor? You're going to check off the box if any of these apply to you. As of today, you're an emancipated minor, or you were an emancipated minor immediately before you reached the age of being an adult in your state. The court must be located in your state of legal residence at the time of the court's decision was issued. For some of these, the financial aid office will require for additional information. So if you do answer, check off any of those boxes, just be prepared that we will require additional information. Okay. Does someone other than your parent or step parent have legal guardianship over you as determined by a court in your state of legal residence? For this question, the definition of legal guardianship doesn't include your parents, even if they were appointed by a court to be your guardian. You're also not considered a legal guardian of yourself. In this case, you're going to check off the box if you can provide a copy of the court's decision that, one, you were in legal guardianship as of today, and you were in legal guardianship immediately before you reached the age of being an adult in your state. You're not going to check off this box if you're still a minor and the court decision is no longer in effect, or the court decision wasn't in effect at the time you became an adult, or custody was awarded by the courts and the court papers say custody, not guardianship. So that one can be sometimes a little bit tricky. Again, the financial aid office will require additional information if it happens that you answered some of these questions. And they might not, if none of these apply to you, then you're simply going to check off the none of the above box. Next slide, please. Okay, we're continuing on with the dependency status questions. Keep in mind that to fall under these, you must have been in high school in fall 2020 or spring 2021 to answer yes. So some of you may just skip, or not skip these, but answer no to them. So at any time on or after July 1st, did your high school or school district homeless liaison determine that you were an accompanied youth who was homeless? If that applies to you, you'll check that off. Was there anybody involved in your school that can speak of that, like a counselor or principal? That's what that's pretty much saying. At any time on or after July 1st, 2020, did the director or an emergency shelter transitional housing program funded by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development determine that you were an accompanied youth? Again, you'll answer whichever applies to you. And just take a look at the dates. This is referring to fall 20 and spring 2021. So remember, this is for 21, 22. So you're gonna have to think back a little bit on this. If you are homeless and self-supporting or are at risk of being homeless but answered no to these questions, you can call the financial aid office. And I'll quickly go over that in the next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. And lastly, again, this is kind of going back to some of the questions that we were receiving earlier. I can't provide my parents' information, so on and so forth. This specific slide this is where it's going to determine if we're going to need the information, your parent information for the FAFSA. On this page, you're going to check off the box that best applies to you. You'll check off the box that says you'll be providing parent information. If you're not, because you can't, because of a special circumstance, then that's when you will contact our office and we'll assess the situation further. There are circumstances where it becomes difficult for a student to provide parent information. For whatever the case may be, you're unable to provide that information. If you're a dependent student and are in a situation where you're unable to provide the information, your parent information, then you can contact our office for guidance. This is what we consider a dependency override. Again, we'll assess the information and determine if we need additional documents from you or maybe letters from a third party. I think I pretty much have covered everything in regards to choosing your college's housing plans and dependency status. Now I'll have the next presenter take over.
Hi, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me. My name is Dominique Isabeau. I'm a financial aid counselor here at the Office of Financial Aid. In this section, we're actually going to start looking at the parent demographics and the income information with the IRS retrieval tool, if you're a FAFSA applicant, and the manual entry of the income information. So what you want to make sure you're doing is you are periodically saving your FAFSA, which you are able to do. Because the FAFSA belongs to you as the student, when it references you or your, it is referencing you as the student, okay? For our dependent students, it will ask for parent demographic information. One of the questions will ask, such as the day you're filling out the FAFSA, so literally the day that you're filling it out, what is the current marital status of your parent? In this question, you want to answer either the married/remarried, single if they were never married, divorced or separated, or unmarried and living together. Okay, and again, that's the day of you filling out the FAFSA, their current marital status. It will ask you the date of marriage / remarriage, so make sure that you're also entering that date. It will then ask the parent's name, their date of birth, their social security number, or for our CADAA application, it might ask the ITIN number. For our FAFSA students, if your parent does not have a social security number, again, for our FAFSA students, if your parent does not have a social security number, you want to enter all zeros, okay? That is for our FAFSA students. If your parents do not have a social security number, enter all zeros. One of the questions then will ask to confirm if the parent has lived in their state for at least 5 years. Parent state of legal residence is where their true, fixed, and permanent home is. Okay, so you want to make sure that you are answering all of those demographic questions for the parent. We can go ahead and go to next slide. The next set of questions is related to the household size information and the number in college. So the household size question will ask if you or your parents, when answering the household size question, it will include you, your parents, a step parent if they live with your parents' other children. If your parents provide at least 50% of their support between July 1st, 2021 and June 30th, 2022, or anyone else who lives within your parents' household to whom your parent provides at least 50% of their support, again, between July 1st, 2021 and June 30th, 2022. So make sure that you are including all of those individuals in your household. Now, in terms of the number in college, you should include you as yourself, any siblings or other people in your parents' household who will be enrolled at least half time in 2021-2022 school year. Okay, that's for the number in college. You would include yourself, your siblings, or any other people in your parents' household who will be enrolled at least half time between 2021 and 2022 school year. You can go ahead and go to the next slide, please. In this set of questions, it will begin to ask for your parents' financial information. This is where you guys want to have your parents' 1040s and or W-2s from 2019 in front of you. So make sure that you guys have that right now, because this is the section that we are going to begin referencing your parents' financial information. At this time, one of the questions will ask if your parents have already completed a 2019 tax return. The way that you answer this question is you would indicate already completed if they have filed a 2019 tax return. If they have not yet filed a 2019 tax return but will be filing, you will put will file. If they are not required to file or are not going to file a tax return, you would put not going to file. And this is looking at the 2019 tax year. The next question will ask the type of tax return that they filed, and you can select if they have filed the IRS 1040 or any other applicable answer that applies to you. The next set of questions will ask the filing status on their tax return. So you want to make sure that on their tax return, when it asks your parents' filing status for their tax return, you are selecting either married filing jointly, married filing separately, single, or head of household, again, based on the filing status on their tax return. For our FAFSA filers, we have referenced this a little bit during the presentation, but you want to make sure that for our FAFSA filers, you do have the option to use the IRS data retrieval tool, which would officially transfer the tax information over from the IRS. We will look at this a little bit more closely in the next slide, but do be aware in this section, you will have the option to link to the IRS. So if we want to go ahead and go to next slide, we will go a little bit more into detail once you choose the link to the IRS option for our FAFSA filers. If you are eligible to use the IRS data retrieval tool, we highly recommend using the tool for several reasons. It is the easiest way to provide your tax information. It's the best way to ensure that your FAFSA form has accurate tax information, and you won't need to provide a copy of your or your parents' tax return to CSUN if selected for verification. So we do recommend, highly recommend, that you guys attempt to use the IRS data retrieval tool option on the FAFSA. If you use the IRS data retrieval tool to transfer your parents' tax return information from the IRS, the information won't display on your FAFSA form. For their protection, the answer to each question is replaced with transferred from the IRS. So do be aware that when reviewing your FAFSA, when you are looking at the answers to the questions, it will show transferred from the IRS in place of the answer, okay? Make sure that when you guys are entering the information on the IRS data retrieval tool, that you are entering it exactly as it appears on the tax return, even if it's including a typo. All information must match to transfer the data to FAFSA. Again, so when it asks the address or the other information when on the IRS data retrieval tool function, you want to make sure that you are matching whatever is on the tax return, okay? If you want to go ahead at this moment and go to next slide, please. So after clicking submit to the IRS data retrieval tool, it will look for the taxpayer's information. If everything matches, you'll see this screen. So if you guys go ahead and look, this is the screen that you're going to want to see if everything matches up. Now, very important, if you guys do want to transfer the information over officially using the IRS data retrieval tool, you go ahead and you press transfer now to then transfer the taxpayer's information over to FAFSA. Okay, make sure that you guys don't skip this step, that if you are going to utilize that tool, you press transfer now, okay? Once back at FAFSA's website, again, you will see a message confirming the information was transferred. However, if you decide that you'd rather enter the information manually, you can then select do not transfer to be taken back to the FAFSA. We can go ahead and go to next slide. If you decide that you would rather enter the information manually, you can again select do not transfer to be taken back to the FAFSA. At this section, again, if you're entering the information manually, you would want to have your parents' 1040 and or W-2s ready if, again, you're going to be entering it manually. The next question, question 89, will ask the adjusted gross income, the AGI. If you were looking at the 1040 tax return, the adjusted gross income can be found on line 8B of the 2019 1040. Again, the adjusted gross income can be found on line 8B of the 2019 1040. The next question, question 90, will then ask the income taxes paid. This would be found on line 14 of the 1040. So make sure you're looking at line 14 of the 1040. If there is a Schedule 2 included, you would then look at the Schedule 2, line 2, and you would minus line 2 from the line 14 of the 1040. Again, so make sure you look at line 14 of the 1040. If there is a Schedule 2, you would then look at line 2 of that Schedule 2 and deduct that from line 14 to get the number for income taxes paid. If there is no Schedule 2, you would just use the number found on line 14. Again, if there is no Schedule 2, you would just use the number found on line 14. As well as if the amount is negative, you would enter 0 in place of that negative number. Again, if you guys are looking at the tax return and you see a negative number, you would enter a 0 in place of that negative number. Okay. We can go ahead and go to next slide. So this next set of questions, questions 92 and 93, will ask how much income from work for parent 1 and for parent 2. You can find this number on the box 1 of your parents' 2019 W-2s or by looking at the 1040. Now, when you're looking at the 1040, you would look at line 1 of the 1040. You would then look at Schedule 1 if there is a Schedule 1, and you would add up lines 3 and 6 and the amount in box 14, code A, on the Schedule K belonging to each parent. If none of these amounts belong to one of your parents, then you can enter 0 for that parent. So again, make sure that when you're looking at the 1040, you will look at line 1 of the 1040. And then you guys can go ahead and look at Schedule 1, lines 3 and 6. You would add that all together if there's a Schedule 1. And then if there is a Schedule K, you would look at the amount in box 14, code A, in the Schedule K. The next question, 94, will ask, as of the day you're filling out the FAFSA, the current balance of your parents' cash, savings, and checking accounts. Do not include financial aid in this number. So that next question where it asks your parents' current balance as of the day you're filling out the FAFSA of their cash, their savings, or their checking accounts, do not include your financial aid in those numbers. I think at this time that should conclude the parent financial section, and we are going to move on to the next section and the next set of questions. Thank you guys so much.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Armenga Kashmanian, and I'm a financial aid counselor, and I will be covering the next section of the application as it relates to some additional 2019 parent financial information, and specifically as it relates to whether or not a simplified path is possible on the application. And then we'll take a look at some specific untaxed income information for parents. And lastly, we'll cover parental asset information. However, before I get into the details of the next few slides, I'd like to share some hopefully helpful tips. Just to reiterate, all information related to parent financial information requested on the applications is for the 2019 year. And the information should be reported for individuals that are listed as parents on the application. If you are entering an amount that includes cents, please do not report cents on the application and instead round up or down to the nearest dollar. Only whole dollar amounts should be reported. If a question does not apply and it requires an amount, please enter 0. So with those tips, let's get started. And I hope, again, for this section of the application that you will have 2019 parent tax returns in front of you if they filed, and 2019 W-2 forms in front of you if it's applicable. So on this slide, we're gonna examine closely 3 sets of questions that are gonna help to determine whether a simplified path is possible on the application. And what simplified path to the application simply means is it will determine, based on the responses to these 3 questions, whether a parental asset information will be required and whether it will be used in determining aid eligibility, and whether other types of income questions will need to be answered or not. So let's look at the first question, which will be, if your parents filed the 2019 tax return, 1040 federal tax return, one of the questions will be, did your parents file a Schedule 1? So if your parents' federal tax return, as you look through it, does not include a Schedule 1, you want to enter a response of no to that question. Additionally, if you want to enter a response of no, if your parents filed the Schedule 1, but filed it only to report very specific types of income, and those specific types of income are unemployment income, educator expenses, IRA deductions, student loan interest deduction, Alaska Permanent Fund dividend, and lastly, to report virtual currency. Okay, so in other words, the only reason they filed the Schedule 1 was to report those specific types of income, and there was no business or farm income reported. If that's the case, then you want to enter no to the question, did your parents file a Schedule 1? If your parents filed a Schedule 1 and you are unable to determine the specific reasons as to why they filed it, then you can also enter a response of don't know to this question. Lastly, if your parents were able to successfully use the IRS data retrieval tool, This question is automatically answered for them. The data retrieval tool will do the analysis and correctly respond to that question. So you won't need to enter a manual response. The next question in determining whether a simplified path is possible or not is a question related to dislocated worker. And the question specifically asks, as of today, meaning the date that you're doing the application, is one of your parents a dislocated worker? And on the slide, we've provided you a very specific definition of dislocated worker for the purposes of financial aid eligibility and the purposes of filing the FAFSA or the CADAA. So let's look at that definition a bit closely. So the way a dislocated worker is defined for purposes of the application is it's an individual who has been laid off and eligible for unemployment benefits, even if those benefits have already been exhausted. And this is a very important second part of the definition, and a very important and that I want to underscore. And that person is unlikely to return to their previous occupation, okay? Another scenario might be that a parent was self-employed, but as of today is unemployed, and as a result of a general economic condition in the community is unable to return to his previous self-employment type of business or occupation. And then lastly, the last two scenarios that are presented is if a parent is considered a displaced homemaker who has been providing unpaid service to a family member in the home, and that parent is dependent on the income of another family member. So if that scenario is applicable, you would answer yes to the question of parent being a displaced worker. And lastly, a displaced worker is a dependent spouse of an active duty member of the armed forces and is unemployed or underemployed and having difficulty finding employment. So you and your parents will need to look at that question and determine if any of the scenarios apply to your parent and respond accordingly. The third question in determining whether a simplified path is possible or not is a question related to federal benefit, and specifically whether or not your parents or anyone in your parents' household is receiving very specific federal benefits. And this particular question references the 2019 calendar year or 2020 calendar year. So it would be in either year if your parents or anyone in their household specifically received these federal benefits. And those benefits are Medicaid, SSI or Supplemental Security Income, SNAP benefits or Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, free or reduced price school lunch, TANF benefits or temporary assistance for needy families, WIC benefits, meaning special supplemental nutrition program for women, infants, and children, And basically you would need to look at this, and there may be more than one benefit that is applicable. You would mark off all that apply, or if none applies, then you would choose the response, none of the above. Next slide, please. Okay. So on this next slide, we're going to continue on with looking at parent additional financial information. And this is a series of questions that we will need either your parents' W-2 form or I should say their 2019 tax return. Now, these series of questions may or may not apply. And as I stated at the outset, if a question doesn't apply but requires an amount, you want to enter 0. So, and one other caveat to this information for FAFSA filers, if your parents did not file a 2019 tax return, and that's what you are indicating on the application, then you will not be presented with these questions. Okay, so let's look at the questions in a bit more detail. So one of the questions is related to combat pay. And combat pay is defined as paid received if your parent was serving in the military and was working or serving in regions designated as hazard zones or combat zones. The type of combat pay that is referenced here is only taxable combat pay that's included in your parents' 2019 adjusted gross income. Untaxed combat pay should be excluded here. Combat pay, just detailing a little bit more, combat pay is not reportable for enlisted persons or warrant officers. Commissioned officers will need to calculate this amount by subtracting the amount in box 12 of the W-2 form with designation of code Q from the total combat pay that can be found on their leave and earnings statement. Okay, so combat pay is only taxable. That should be reported here. The next question is referencing any college grant and scholarship aid that your parents may have received and that was reported on their tax return. Again, this is only taxable grants and scholarships and does not refer to any of the federal Pell Grant programs or Cal Grant program or any institutional grants that your parent may have received in 2019 if they were a student. This specific question does reference, and if your parents received any sort of AmeriCorps benefits or grant and scholarship portions of fellowships and assistantships, okay, that were not employment related. If they had any benefits like that, an amount would be entered here. Also, for this question, usually what we see this question or this type of income more common for students than parents. But if parents do have it, the way it may be found on the tax return is it may be reported on line 1 of the 1040 next to where the wages are reported. And there would be an annotation with the letters of SCH. and that's short for scholarships. Okay, moving on to the next question related to education credits. This is a fairly common income that we see reported on parents' tax returns. And if that's the case, you want to locate your parents' Schedule 3 and locate line 3. If there is an amount reported there, then you want to enter it under education credits. If the amount is blank or 0, you enter 0. If your parents did not file a Schedule 3, you enter 0 as a response. Next question has to do with untaxed portions of individual retirement account distributions and pensions. Again, this may or may not be applicable to your parents' 2019 income, but if it is, you want to look at the 1040 form, and specifically you want to add up or total up lines 4A and 4C and deduct from that the total of lines 4B and 4D. For this question, any sort of rollover amounts should be excluded. So if on the tax return next to the questions, question 4, there is an annotation of rollover, you want to report 0 here. The next question is related to IRA deductions, so individual retirement account deductions and payments to other qualified plans. And if that income exists and is applicable to your parents, then you want to look at Schedule 1 of the 2019 1040 form and specifically look at lines 15 and 19. If there is an amount reported there under 15 and 19, I should say 15 and or 19, you want to total those up and report it here. And lastly, in this section, tax exempt interest, again, may or may not apply, but if it exists, it would be found on the 2019 Form 1040 line 2A. Okay, next slide. Okay, so now we're moving on to some other additional financial information being collected from your parents. Again, it's referencing to 2019 financial information. And the first question on here is whether or not your parents paid child support in 2019 as required by a court. So if a parent paid child support in 2019, you want to enter the total amount paid for the year. So from January 1st through December 31st of 2019, how much child support did a parent pay? What you want to be careful about here is you want to make sure that you are not including child support paid for children that are reported in your parents' household size on this application, okay? The next question is related to parent earnings from work under a co-op education program. This is a question that we see an amount, it's very rare that we see an amount entered under this question, but should it apply, you want to enter that if your parent had any sort of earnings from a co-op education program offered by a college. This is separate and different from an internship. And then lastly, if your parents were in college and had any sort of need-based employment earnings, and typically we see this through the federal work study program, if your parent had federal work study earnings, so again, this is referencing the parent as opposed to the student, then you want to report that, and that income can be found on the 2019 W-2 form from that employer. Next slide, please. Now we're going into a series of untaxed income questions for parents, again, for 2019. So one of the first questions here is 2019 child support received. So on an earlier slide, we looked at parental child support paid. And this question is collecting if a parent received child support. So you want to, if that's the case, you want to report the total annual amount, and you want to be sure to exclude payments for foster care. Next question deals with untaxed income in the form of living allowances received if your parent is a member of the military or clergy. One caveat is for members of the military, the value of on-base housing or basic military housing is excluded here. Next type of untaxed question or income that we do see fairly commonly reported on the application has to do with tax deferred pension value. And that can be found if your parents worked in 2019 and they have a W-2. You want to look at the W-2 form and locate boxes 12A through 12D and determine if there is an amount reported with the following specific codes. And those codes are D as in dog, E, F as in flag, G, H, or S as in Sam. So those are the very specific codes with amounts reported under boxes 12A through 12D. If there is no amount that's applicable, again, you're gonna enter 0. The next untaxed income type of question is related to parents' veterans benefits, but it's not educationally related benefits. So it's non-education veteran benefits. If your parents received that in 2019, and typically those would be veterans disability benefits or death pension benefits. That's what you want to report here. You want to be careful to exclude any educationally related benefits, such as the Montgomery GI Bill benefits, post 9/11 GI Bill benefits, Veterans Book Rehab benefits, Dependent Education Assistance Program benefits. So any of those are excluded here. So only non-education veteran benefits are reported. And lastly, the last section or the last question for other untaxed income relates to any, it kind of is a catch for all of other untaxed income. And would include if your parents had any sort of workers' comp income or disability benefits and others, as you can see on the slide. What you want to make sure to exclude is any sort of untaxed Social Security benefits that your parents may have received, or SSI benefits and welfare benefits. Next slide. Okay. And lastly, we are going to be looking at the last set of income questions, or I should say asset questions for parents. Now, if you're presented with the option to skip these questions on the application, you want to go ahead and select the response of yes, I want to skip these questions and move on to the next section. All that means is that based on the earlier responses to certain questions, the application has determined that parental assets are not required and are not going to be considered in determining your financial aid eligibility. But if the questions are presented, then you want to make sure to enter an amount, even if it means zero. If a question doesn't apply, if an asset doesn't exist, please don't leave the answer blank and instead report zero. And those asset questions are kind of, at least the first one is pretty straightforward and self-explanatory. One caveat, all of the asset questions here are related to the day that you're submitting the application. So it's not assets back in 2019, it's assets as of today. If you're submitting the application today, what do those assets look like? So the first question is fairly straightforward, and it's collecting parental cash, checking and savings account amounts as of today. You want to exclude any financial aid funds that may be in those accounts. The next asset question is related to investments, and the most common one we'd see is if parents have some sort of a investment property that is in addition to the home that they may be living in. So it's separate from the home that they're living in, because the value of the home that your parents are living in is never reported as an asset. But if they have any sort of rental real estate, then the net worth needs to be reported. And the way the net worth is calculated, the simplest way I can explain is, if they were to sell that property, or if they have some sort of other investment, if they were to sell that today, how much would that be worth? And then from that, you would deduct any debt owed against the property or any other type of investment, and that would give you the net worth value. And then the third asset question here is if your parents are self-employed, if they own a business that employs 100 or more employees, they need to report a net worth for their business or farm. If they own a business or a farm, but they employ less than 100 people, then you report a value of zero here. And with that, it concludes my section of the questions, and it actually concludes the parents' 2019 financial information. And I'm turning it over to the next presenter.
Hi, so I'm Kevin, and I'll quickly be going over how to sign your FAFSA. Luckily, it's pretty simple, and there are only 3 ways to do it. The first, as you can see on the slide, is just to do it electronically. To do that, you're going to need your FAFSA ID, which you should already have, since you need that to log into your FAFSA. If you don't have it, you could always contact FAFSA directly at the number we provided earlier for assistance. The second way to sign the FAFSA, if you're the student, is to do so with a signature page. To do that, you would have to submit the FAFSA without a signature, and then print out the signature page, sign it, and then mail it directly to FAFSA. And the final way to sign the FAFSA is to submit it without a signature, waiting for them to send you your student aid report, also known as the SAR, And once you receive it, sign the SAR and mail it back to FAFSA. So those are the only 3 ways for the student to be able to sign the FAFSA. Moving on to the next slide, it would essentially be the same for your parents. They also only have 3 options, which is signing electronically, signing with the signature page, and signing the SAR. For parents specifically who don't have a Social Security number, they would want to sign with either the SAR or by printing out the signature page and mailing it to the FAFSA directly. So again, this section is super short and super simple. There's only 3 ways to do it. Our next presenter will be going over on how to sign the CADAA.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Bernard Tila. I will be going over the student and parent signature section on the CADAA application. After completing the parent tax information on the CADAA application, it will then direct you to the signature section of the application. By signing the CADAA application online or by mailing your signature, you are certifying that the information you provided on the CADAA application is accurate and correct, and that you will be using the state financial aid that you receive or will receive only to pay for the cost of attending your institution. In this case, will be CSUN. You're also certifying that you are not in default on any student loans or have made satisfactory arrangement on repaying your loans. You do not owe money back to California student grants, and that you will notify your institution, CSUN, if you have defaulted on any student loans. In order to electronically sign the application, you must check the certification box and submit the application online. Prior to submitting the application online, it is important that you double check all information you have inputted on the application prior to submission. After submitting the application will prompt you a confirmation date and time of the application when it was submitted, and a notice that you must allow 24 hours until you are able to make changes or corrections on the application. Next slide, please. After pressing the OK box on the pop-up, you will then notice a parent signature hyperlink on green, marked as green, on the top of the confirmation page. And sometimes if you don't have your parents with you during the application process, you or your parent may go back to the main page of the California Student Aid Commission website to submit the parent signature. Next slide, please. If you do not have a parent PIN already, you may apply for a PIN by entering the student information and parent information, which accurately reflects the same information inputted in the application. It's important that the application year is correct, student's name is correct, date of birth, zip code, and as well as the student's email. It is important that you save your parent PIN and DREAM Act ID for future references, as you may need this information in the future or during your renewal for the CADAA application. By signing the CADAA application, your parents are certifying that they have provided information that is accurate and correct, and that they agree, if asked, to provide information that will verify the accuracy of the completion of the application, such as federal income tax and other documents. It is important to note that only one parent is required to sign the CADAA application. If you are having difficulties in submitting your signature online, you may submit a physical signature page to California Student Aid Commission. If you have questions, you may also contact student support at csac.california.gov. After completing both the parent and student signature section, the California DREAM Act application will then provide you a CAL-SAR or a student aid report. Next slide, please. And the student aid report will allow you to have records of your information inputted on the CADAA application. So if you want to go back, you want to reference some of your answers on the application, this is the place to go about looking at the information. You can print it, you can save it on your computer as a PDF. With that being said, you've completed the application, and this concludes the signature section on the CADAA application. I will pass it on to Emily.
Hi, I'm Emily Fitch, and I'm the last member of your CSUN Financial Aid Counselor team. So at this point, you've finished your FAFSA or CADAA application, and what will happen next is CSUN will receive your application and will email you a confirmation beginning in late January. Then in March, we'll notify you by email if you need to submit any documents. They'll also appear on your financial aid to-do list on the portal. If we do send you a request, you should respond to it as soon as possible to avoid delaying your award for next fall. Our priority deadline is usually at the end of April, but try not to wait that long because if something's missing or incomplete, it may take time for us to notify you and for you to resubmit, and you don't want to miss that priority deadline. We'll begin awarding continuing students in late June, and we'll continue awarding throughout the summer. If you're a new CSUN student, we'll begin awarding in late March. Make sure you're reading all of your emails from our office and checking your portal regularly. You should also check out our website for announcements and helpful information, and follow us on Instagram at CSUN FinAid for tips and reminders. And you can contact our office if you have any additional questions. Our reps are available to answer questions Monday through Thursday from 10 to 4:30 and Friday from 10 to 4. And counselors are available Monday through Wednesday from 10 to 3 if you have any special circumstances or need additional financial aid advising. Finally, that concludes our session on filing your FAFSA or CADAA. If you still need assistance, if we weren't able to get to your question through the Q&A feature, or you have a specific question about your application, you can call our office during those counseling hours, Monday through Wednesday from 10 to 3, and a counselor can help you either over the phone or Zoom. As a reminder, this webinar was being recorded and it will be posted to our website so you can refer back to it later. Finally, after this session is closed, you'll be directed to our survey. Please complete this survey so we can continue to offer webinars to you in the future. Thank you for attending our 2021-2022 Financial Aid Application webinar.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye,
Have a good
everyone.
evening. Bye.
Good evening.
Bye.